Welcome to session 4. We start session 4 by giving thanks to the indigenous peoples who shared their lands with us. We have 4 presentations, 15 minutes each. I'll kind of sort of wave at about 14 or so. It's like wrap-up time. And then a few minutes for questions after, about 5. So don't be philosophers, okay, Mariana? And then hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end for integrative questions. We have an hour and a half, 15 minutes between sessions. If we run over 5 minutes, I'm sure Svetlana won't be too upset. Okay, so I'm Tazim Jamal, moderator. Without further ado, howdy, all these Aggies, I tell you, from Texas. So we start with Julie Kircher, who's the speaker for a paper on regenerating tourism with an ethic of care and empathy. Co-authors Seunghoon Lee, Tazim Jamal, and whoever she is, and Jonan Phillip Donaldson, a brilliant learning scientist. Julie, you're on.
Thank you. So, as Tazim said, my name is Julie Kircher. I'm from Texas A&M. I worked with Tazim, Seunghoon Lee, and Dr. Jonan Phillip Donaldson on our paper, Regenerating Tourism with an Ethic of Care and Empathy. We can move the slide forward. It'd be great. So over the last few years, there we go. The COVID-19 pandemic, it's been rough. You know, we've had many challenges, especially that we as humans have faced. Climate change, we've kind of seen a lot of the effects on that. It's an existential threat in the 21st century, compounding social and economic hardships. So much was compounded by the pandemic. So how do we facilitate sustainable, restorative development and regenerative, resilient futures, especially given the injustices that we see and the hardships created by the pandemic and by climate change? So our paper argues that to accomplish this, we need to better understand and adapt to complex social ecological systems, as well as have active engagement with ethical principles to facilitate resilience, justice, and well-being. We can move to the next slide. So first, we searched some key databases on tourism, complexity, complex systems thinking, ethic of care, feminism, and empathy, and a lot of growing number of articles here, which is great to see. What I do want to talk about a little bit is Farrell Twinning Ward's 2004 article that offered a thorough, seminal discussion on tourism as a complex system, where the events are dynamic, changeable, emergent, and mostly unpredictable. There are multiple stakeholders involved, numerous interrelated social, cultural, economic, environmental, and political impacts to local to global interdependence. So we're seeing with this, you need a collaborative, cross-disciplinary, and some could say interdisciplinary approach to address these wicked problems like climate change and the like, to adapt to uncertainty and to build that resilience we're looking for. Linear solutions that we've tried in the past haven't really worked, so trying something a little different is what's needed. Next slide, please. So what key principles guide wicked problem solving and regenerative tourism in the complex tourism system? So first, complex systems require that collaborative, concentrated effort and decision making. They also include multiple stakeholders, are inclusive of residents, and utilize an integrated approach to adapt to uncertainty and emergence. It also utilizes rationality, creating a relational perspective between people, events, and our non-human others. We also use adaptive management to address emergence, nonlinear problems, and co-create solutions. It's also guided by principles of justice, responsibility, sustainability, ethic of care, and as we're arguing, empathy in order to nurture relational understanding and inclusiveness. Next slide, please. We did a literature search on ethic of care, care ethics, and empathy as well. And there were some articles, they've been declining recently in the number that have been published, especially when you look at other keywords like feminism and empathy, with only 11 and 17 respectively in the last few years. So 2 key contributors to feminist care ethics and ethic of care I am going to talk about today are Carol Gilligan and Nell Noddings. Carol Gilligan provided the foundational principles for ethic of care. She argued that people need to frame their caring and their responsibility based on reciprocal and deeply embedded personal connections. She also talked about the feminine voice of relationships, responsibilities, and affective dimensions like our emotions, aid in creating that care perspective that we really associate with care ethics. Nell Noddings, another philosopher, also contributed to feminist ethic of care and centered it around interpersonal relationships and caring specifically for others. Caring is an integral principle, and relationships based on that foundation of care for others is inclusive of feelings and emotions and helps to instantiate moral responsibilities. Other literature and feminist literature on ethic of care offered some insights on being attentive to other emotions, like we're talking love and other kinds of big feeling emotions. Affective dimensions, we don't really look at that a lot too much in modernist rational thinking, but in order to create places for healing and caring and get a lot of that resiliency, we do argue that we need to look a little bit more and ask a little bit more for people to look at empathy. Next slide, please. So there are three main types of empathy that we see and you see a lot of research on. We have that cognitive empathy, which is the mind. It's thinking about empathy. You can understand the emotions of others. That affective empathy, the next one, is actually feeling the emotions of others, kind of understanding their experiences and being empathetic towards them. Cognitive empathy is the one that we're really trying to focus on, and it's actually the practice of engaging in empathetic responses and behavior for critical action and change. It does involve a critical consciousness and practice for action and change. Yes, I keep saying action and change because that is what is really, really important when it comes to cognitive empathy. It really encourages people to act upon their emotions and feelings to create that change. These three types of empathy are interrelated. If you notice, affective here added on the feeling and understanding to what you have with cognitive empathy. Cognitive does the same thing. It adds that added action to everything that is underneath. Next slide, please. A search on ethic of care, tourism, care ethics in tourism, and empathy in tourism also had a rising number of articles, which is great to see. In the interest of time, I do only want to talk about these main two articles, Empathy and Tourism, Limits and Possibilities by Hazel Tucker in 2017, and Presenting Narratives of Empathy Through Dark Commemorative Exhibitions During the Centenary of World War I by Jennifer Lang and Warwick Frost in 2019. Hazel Tucker really differentiated what she called unquestioned or non-reflective empathy versus unsettled or reflective empathy. Non-reflective empathy is basically a gut reaction. You're attempting to feel rage or hope on behalf of another, but you're not really reflecting on why you're having these emotions. While unsettled empathy does have that added reflection. Having that reflection is key to produce a sense of productive shame, as she called it, which helps people have that call to action. Though she didn't actually talk about cognitive empathy, it's kind of implied because she's calling for social healing based on that sense of productive shame, and also calling for justice within tourist attractions and museums. Jennifer Lang and Warwick Frost also added a little bit to this discussion, really wanting to hone in that empathy is not the same as sympathy. Empathy has a more internalized understanding of the states of others and seeing things from their point of view and stepping metaphorically into their shoes, which I'm currently not wearing. In their case study, they looked at museums that were dark tourism museums, and they used storytelling, design, and technology to increase the emotion and engagement when telling the stories of historically marginalized communities and voices. Increasing the emotions and engagement through these personal stories heightened senses of empathy and identity in visitors towards the exhibition. Next slide, please. I also want to talk about Street Voices, which was in one of Tazim's books. This was by Diane Dredge and Eoin Meehan in Tazim's Justice and Ethics in Tourism in 2019. This was a social enterprise which really illustrates how cognitive empathy enables that critical learning and praxis. Also, kind of ties in a little bit on that looking into complex systems. So this was a social enterprise that worked towards capacity building, rehabilitating vulnerable populations, those experiencing substance abuse, homelessness, and prostitution. This program trained these individuals to become street guides. It provided a collaborative opportunity for them to frame, develop, and deliver walking tours. They provided an alternative perspective to visitors, and their interactions with the visitors had a mutual benefit. It gave empathy, new perspective, combating stereotypes, and awareness for the visitors, but it gave training, psychological and social recognition, and empowerment for all of the guides. This study also illustrated social justice, well-being, and empathy. And experience how they are dealing with these challenges. And that really starts to show how cognitive empathy can affect others. Next slide, please. So why am I honing in on ethic of care and empathy, specifically that cognitive empathy relative to complex systems in tourism? How to tie this all together. So when addressing wicked problems like homelessness, marginalization, climate change, pandemic, socioeconomic challenges, and other issues we face, we have to work together. Complex systems are fluid and dynamic, like I've said before, and require collaborative, multi-stakeholder efforts to conceptualize actions and practice to create solutions under all of these conditions of emergence, uncertainty, and change. This can help to regenerate fragmented, damaged, complex social ecological systems, build towards resilience and the well-being with the help of guiding principles like justice, care ethics, and the like. Next slide, please. The last paper I worked on, revisiting design thinking for learning and practice, critical pedagogy, cognitive empathy, had a framework for design thinking for engaged learning, critical pedagogy, and epistemic justice with the help of collaborative engagement and cognitive empathy. We attempted to explore this cognitive empathy through an undergraduate tourism class. We focused on a writing intensive assignment that included a 8x8 drawing. You've seen some of them throughout the PowerPoint. We were wanting the students to gather their experiences, their thoughts, their feelings on COVID-19 and the pandemic, create a drawing, write 150 words about the drawing, and reflect on that, and also experiences of others, so engaging with other students, local residents, and small businesses around, to write a 1,000 to 1,200 word reflective essay about COVID-19 or COVID-19 and the environment. Next slide, please. The results, as you can see up here, and whenever the slide loads with the pictures, they started to engage a little bit in cognitive empathy, a little bit in that affective empathy, but there wasn't really any call to action. They weren't really driven to do anything with it. So next slide, please. In 2021, where we had them really hone in on understanding the perspectives of others, they did have stronger empathetic reflections and also a strong desire to help not only their fellow communities, but their fellow humans to heal in a post-COVID world. Several of the students also started to express how they were trying to look deeper into how to respectfully and ethically travel in a post-COVID world, which is really important when looking at sustainability and resilience. Next slide, please. The overall results of this project showed the importance of orienting assignments to real-world issues in which they engage teams meet stakeholders and residents face to face in open dialogue, seek to find potential solutions from their perspective, and also engaging in joint solution finding to complex social and economic systems, complex sustainability issues, as well as in tourism. This collaboration lends to more engaged learning, critical thinking and praxis, collaborative efforts to address these wicked problems, and to gain the positionality of themselves with the other in order to create these potential solutions. Next slide, please. Moving forward with the task of regenerative and sustainable tourism in this complex world with multiple global threats like climate change, sustainability, pandemics like COVID-19, racial inequalities, and the like, an ethic of justice and an ethic of care and empathy are integral to facilitate that healing, destination and community resilience, and responsibility for the well-being of not just humans, but of our non-human others. Next slide, please. All of the pictures that you have seen, if all of them have loaded, were from a project that I'm working on called Quilting in Solidarity. It is an ongoing work in progress that is taking the students drew, and I'm embroidering them into quilts, and they will be on display at Texas A&M. And this experience will also be an empathy-based experience where people will be able to visit with, look at the quilts, react with the quilts, and also read the stories of these students and reflect and engage in discussion. Thank you.
Great, Julie. She worked really, really hard, y'all. Her presentation, Julie, you shaved off 2 minutes, so there.
I did? Okay. I start talking really fast sometimes, but yeah, let's. Any questions? Patrick, you look like you have a question for me.
You have a few minutes for questions, but you do have to come up with a microphone so that people on Zoom can hear you. The same you're going to respond. So use a lot of 5 minutes in walking exercises. Questions? Anybody online?
Nothing online.
Nothing online. And we did lose, by the way, quite a few minutes of soundtrack for the Zoom participants, so we just have to keep an eye on that. So there are some very integrated questions to ask about, well, what does this all mean?
You have a question?
Do I need to go? Sorry, yes.
Or speak very loudly.
So I'm very interested in the justice concept that you're using, and I see that it pops up a lot. And I've been wondering, here I wrote, in your research, when you talk about justice, then my question is, who defines what justice means in this context? Sorry, that was just simple.
That's actually a brilliant question. When we look at concepts like justice, we do tend to look at it from a lens. Everyone looks at things from a different lens. But when we talk about justice, we talk about it from usually the perspective of people who are less marginalized, trying to find justice for those who are more marginalized, and to bring people up to the same level as we are. That's how we tend to find justice.
Any other points? Because
Great question.
One sort of complementary thought could be in the context of empathy, right? One, that there is a distributive justice and a formal justice system, but there's also a sense of whose justice, and justice from whose perspective, as Julie was saying, right? And Julie's saying that, for instance, in the classroom, students are being encouraged to see it from the eyes of the other, the person outside of themselves. And then the question becomes, whose justice is appropriate, right? There's the formal justice system that Alice very young will say, don't look backwards and try and punish. Let's look forward and come together. Just like the Truth and Reconciliation Committees bring people together to try to address injustice or hurt. We want to look forward and bring people to the conversation. So the students are being encouraged to try and really see the world from the perspective of the other.
of the participants. Maybe understand justice from their perspective too, in order to bring that into policy making and other kinds of management that might be occurring at that time.
Yes.
Am I?
You're correct, yes. So that way more eloquently than I did. But
There's a really nice literature in psychology from Susan Clayton, and she is looking into justice as a sense of justice. So it's not the arbitrary definition of what just means, it's what people think.
which is really important because it doesn't necessarily matter what the textbook definition of it is. It's how we use the words, how we use the concepts.
Really
I'm going to get that from you later.
The empathy as a pathway to feel that how
Yes, need that cognitive empathy so we actually have action for justice.
Great, Julie, thank you so much. We might be having debated questions at the end if we have a few minutes.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if I could just do it from here so that the folks on Zoom can hear me, our next talk is on food experiences and quality of life, a slow tourism study by Ting-Yen. I'm speaking along with William Ramos, his co-author. Tim will be presenting, and they're both from Indiana University, USA.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim, and I'm from Indiana University. And my co-author is Dr. Joseph Chen and Dr. William Ramos. And the topic I would like to share today is food experiences and quality of life, a slow tourism study. Next slide, please. Okay. So as we know, in current society, climate change and global warming and environmental pollution has posed a risk to global tourism industry. And also in current society, people, they really suffer from very fast lifestyle. That means people, they do their things very, very fast. They don't even slow down to enjoy their surrounding. That cause people feel stressed, feel intense, feel nervous. So at this time, alternative tourism that is less commercialized and consists with nature and social has emerged. So we focus on alternative tourism that have two driving forces. The first one is environmental sustainability, and the second one is personal or social well-being. So nowadays, people, they have changed. They don't appreciate, they don't really do mass tourism right now. They tend to slow down their pace during their trip. So they go to a travel destination. They trying to have different kind of tourism experience that emphasize a deeper interaction with local people, or they trying to see local landscape or local environment. So a new form of tourism that integrate environmental and personal concern has emerged. That's called slow tourism. However, the slow tourism, the definition of slow tourism remain very elusive. That means even though there's lots of scholars have focused on slow tourism, but the definition haven't been really fully explored. Next slide, please. So when we talk about tourism, food is a very important component for tourist experience. That means people, they will go to a place for eating, to dining in the restaurant. So slow food become an alternative option for tourists during their trip. However, previous study have focused on local food, healthy food, ethnic food, authentic food, but there's no study for really focused on slow food experience. So for me, I think slow food tourism is very important, that can be fully explored. And also, on the other hand, you also indicate that it is necessary to examine how tourist experience relate to one's quality of life. So for me, I think it's very interesting to investigate tourists, their food experience and their quality of life. And we can see that there is lots of research, lots of literature focused on, they talk about slow tourist activity could improve tourist quality of life and well-being. But there's, like, to my knowledge, there's not so many like research focused about slow food tourism that could improve tourist quality of life, well-being, wellness, or any health-related indicators. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this study, we would like to try to define slow tourism and identify the attribute that explains slow food experience. And second one, we will develop a structural model to explore tourist slow food experiences. And the last one is to examine tourist quality of life and life satisfaction from the aspect of their slow food experiences. Next slide, please. Okay, so from the literature review, we can see like people talk about slow tourism. That means people, they travel to a place with local transportation, such as you go to the place, you will take local buses, shuttle buses, or cycling, or you can like walking. And also you will immerse yourself in traditional activity or culture. That means you will actively go to participate local cultural activities such as dancing, like, or food preparation. And also people, they will practice environmental sustainability, and it is very beneficial to one's personal life and well-being. So the person who involved in slow tourism, we call slow tourists, they tend to focus on quality and authentic experience, and they take time during their trip. That means they slow down their pace during their trip to rediscover a sense of self. And also, slow tourism is also a low carbon potential of travel that may mitigate environmental harm and climate change. So from the literature review, we can slow tourism can be explained by three perspectives. The first one is the authenticity, the second one is slowness, and the last one is environmental consciousness. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about authenticity. So authenticity, previous study have shown that there's two authenticity. The first one is objective related authenticity, and the second one is existential authenticity. So for my research, I will focus on is this existential authenticity. That is the most appropriate approach to understand tourist experience. So existential authenticity offers tourists a chance to escape their regular life, and stimulate their relaxation and their satisfaction, achieve personal goal, and interact with local people at the destination. So this study, we use existential authenticity as a scale to measure authenticity. Next slide, please. Next one is slowness. Slowness is proposed by Dickinson et al. 2011. The slowness, that means when you go to a place, you take a time. That means that you slow down your place, and you will have more chance. If you slow down, you have more chance to engage with local people, or you have more time to see the landscape at the destination. So for here, we define slowness as a tourist who take time in engaging with local, and they value their time during their trip, and they choose slow mode of transportation such as buses, shuttle bus, or cycling, and they will subjectively participate slow activity driven by their own motivations. Next slide, please. And the last one is environmental consciousness. Is one of the core elements of slow tourism. So for environmental consciousness, that means you will have the strong attitude to protect the environment. And also people, the tourists, they at the destination, they will consume environmental friendly products which reduce waste and carbon footprint. So for here, we will define that environmental consciousness in slow tourism is as a tourist who concerned about environmental impact, reduce tourism carbon footprint, conserve nature setting, and appreciate environmental friendly products such as green food, local cuisines. Next slide, please. So, as we know, like slow food is an option that tourists can choose at the destination. So from previous research, we can know that slow food is good, clean, and fair. And the goal of slow food, they can promote local farming and create regional traditional recipe and cuisine. And for slow food, people, when they go to a place, they can have a chance to to prepare their food, like, sorry, to prepare their food with local people. And at that time, you will be educated because the local people, they can bring you some knowledge related to their traditional, how they make the food or how they prepare the food. So for slow food, their goal is to educate consumer about the knowledge of traditional and local food. And slow food is also very important that the slow tourists there, they will appreciate the real good quality food. Next slide, please. So next is slow food experience. While there's not so many study focused on slow food experience, so we will focus on food experience first. So we can see consumers' food experience including food, social, place, service, and time. So it focuses on what is served and where and how it's served and the individual own behavior that they are going to find the food at the destination. So for here, I used the study that suggested slow food experience on slow food from previous study. Next slide, please. Okay, and next one is quality of life. So as the outcome variable, quality of life is it's widely used as an outcome variable to test tourists or residents from tourist or residents perspective. So we can tell Neo et al. 1999 they develop a measurement of tourist quality of life based on bottom-up spillover theory. That means your satisfaction at the leisure or travel destination, it will spill over vertically to your life in general, to your quality of life or well-being. So here we got two factors. The first one is life satisfaction, and the next one is overall quality of life. Next slide, please. So here's the hypothesis development. So we can tell that authenticity and food experience, they got very strong connection between these two. So the first hypothesis is authenticity has a significant influence on tourist slow food experience. And the second one is slowness is associated with tourist slow food seeking experience. So I hypothesize that slowness has a significant influence on tourist slow food experience. The next one is from previous study, we can know that environmental consciousness contributes to the engagement of slow activity and the experience of consuming slow food. So the hypothesis 3 will be environmental consciousness has a significant influence on tourist slow food experiences. Next slide, please. And for hypothesis 4, 5, 6, we can tell that wellness tourism experience, they will influence leisure life satisfaction and quality of life. And from previous research, it shows that elderly tourists' quality of life are influenced by their quality of life and trip experiences. And last one, slow food and wine consumption contribute to better quality of life. So based on previous literature review, we hypothesize 3 hypotheses. Next slide, please. And next will be the structure model, I guess. Yes. So this is the structure model. You can take a look. Next slide, please. Okay, so for the method section, the data was collected online through online survey questionnaire, and the participants were recruited through Amazon Mechanical Turk. And I choose the winery because the winery is a suitable location for investigating slow food consumption. So we set the criteria for the participant that need to be 21 or older, and they need to purchase or consume slow food at least in the past 5 years. And 453 questionnaire were used for analysis. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the scale that I use to measure like each concept. Next slide, please. So this is the method, the procedure. We will do demographic reliability test, conversion validity, discriminant validity, CFA, and SEM test. Next slide, please. So this is the respondent profile. Next slide, please. So as we can see, the Cronbach alpha is greater than 0.7, and the CR is greater than 0.7 as well. And the AV is greater than 0.05. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next step. Sorry. So here we can tell that the AVE is all greater from the diagonal side. So you can tell that it supports the discriminant validity. Next slide, please. And you can see the C-mean divided by degree of freedom is it's less than 3, so it's acceptable fit. And you can see the value greater than 0.9, and the suggested value of RMSEA is smaller than 0.05. So the model is great. The data fits the model well. Next slide, please. So this is the model. So we can tell that next slide, please. I will just speed up. So we can tell that the hypothesis 3, that is environmental consciousness, has significant on slow food experience, has not been supported, and the other are all supported. Next slide, please. So okay, so this is the last from the previous research, we can from my research we can tell that authenticity and slowness are validated as a reliable predictor of tourist slow food experience at the winery, but environmental consciousness does have not significant influence on tourist slow food experience, and tourist slow food experience at the winery positively influence their life satisfaction and quality of life. I think that time's out, right? Okay, I think that will be my presentation. Thank you so much.
Huang's presentation was with Joseph, Chen, and William Ramos as co-authors on the study, also from Vienna University. Questions, anyone? And please come up to the microphone so that those online can hear. And if anyone online has
I guess I'm still a little bit confused about like how to define slow. Is a special indicators to for slow tourism, or is it a mindset that those tourists have, or like in your context that whoever participate in a winery belongs?
You mean the question is, how do I define slow tourism? So from previous study, I do the literature review on it, and I kind of like systematically summarize from previous study that it mentioned about authenticity, slowness, and environmental consciousness, that these 3 pillars are like heavily mentioned in previous studies. So I just incorporate these 3 as a like the attributes that could measure slow food. I mean slow tourism. Yes. Any question?
Any question, Tim?
Yes, Evan.
So my question is about your sample. So you're talking about slow tourism and you're talking about slow tourists, but you collected your sample on MTurk. And I'm curious how you justify doing an online sample for people, did you confirm that they were slow tourists? Or how are these people considered slow tourists, or were they asked to like imagine being a slow tourist, or how did that exactly work?
So I have to admit that this, I put it at the last slide that this is the limitation of this study. I mean, for further research, it is suggested that I can do the research really in the such as slow city or slow festival. Like, I mean, it is a exploratory study, so I think we can I set the criteria on the MTurk to kind of like filter the participant, but for their really background, I haven't really investigated. But for future research, I can definitely.
But I'm wondering how you, I'm just going to yell so pick up in the speaker from the microphone. I'm wondering, how did you set up the questions that you were asking them? Was it like, imagine yourself on a slow tourism experience? Or like, how did you ask those questions to them as they related to slow tourism?
So I put a screening question on it, and that means, are you 21 years, because I set up two criteria. The first one is, are you 21 years old? And the other one is, are you like, have you purchased slow food such as wine products?
Okay.
Yeah,
So
MTurk.
they had self-identified themselves as people who had done a slow tourism experience.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I've lost the Zoom link here, so I'm gonna need some help here, but in the meantime, can Julie, if you mind reading out, can somebody read out the question from Violet? She has a question online, I believe it was on how you measure satisfaction and quality of life.
So I use, just 1 second. Sorry, I mean, like, oh, can I? Okay, so I use the scale that's from Low et al. 2018 and Kim et al. 2015, and I think the scale item asks like how you after you visit the winery, how's your life getting better? I mean, does your life getting better or not? I mean, yeah, that's the question I use, like I adopted from previous studies. Yes, thank you.
Okay, we have our next presentation is on traveling for health, social integration effects of travel participation on health and wellness for people with disabilities, being presented by Chenggang, and his co-author is Xu Ho, both from Indiana University.
Perfect, thank you. Actually, the paper was major revised, so we have now 5 authors. That's me, Shuko, Dr. Shuko, Dr. Zhang Ye, and Dr. Wang Weishen, and Zhang Haoai from Indiana University and Florida Atlantic University. Next slide, please. This is content of this presentation, and next slide, please. So the general public, as well as the tourism academic, often interpret disability based on the assumption that the difficulties of the disabled people experience directly result from their individual impairment. However, the promotion of the social model of disability refers to the issue of disability as a social created problem, a socially constructed phenomenon, not merely a naturally occurring range of diverse conditions of disability within the human race, but a matter of the full integration of individuals into society. The model revealed the fact that people with disability had to face much more barriers during their travel activities other than inaccessibility, including attitudinal, interpersonal, structural, organizational, and institutional barriers. Next slide, please. So being a disabled person would be like people build a bridge that you can't cross. but they will blame you for your disability of not able to walking on the water, which doesn't make sense. And next slide, please. And tourism can be a better design bridge to promote social integration with countless benefits. Studies confirm that social relations, relatedness, connectedness are key factors of the travel motivation of travelers with disability. Social integration during travel can also benefit travelers by developing social relations, establishing social identities to feel accepted and cared for and by others. However, the chance of social integration for people with disability is quite limited. Next slide, please. Disability does not necessarily mean less well-being, but definitely means lower level of social integration. While better chance of social integration could be meaningful for their health, resilience, and well-being perception. So this paper will focus on two questions. The first one is whether travel-resulted social integration has a significant effect on health and well-being perception of people with disability, and how is that works. Next slide, please. From the literature, we can find a lot of evidence that show us social integration, social interaction, and connection during travel are important well-being pursuit. Bond with loved ones during travel is beneficial to one's health. For people with disability, travel participation is linked to more general improvement in personal health and social inclusion. However, people with disability often report their feeling of isolation and loneliness in their travel activities. We can see that the effect of social integration is critical for travelers with disability, yet such effects have been neglected. Maybe because for people without disabilities see travel as a getaway, while people with disabilities see it as a chance to social and a chance to connect. On the other hand, social approval and social inclusion were found to play an important role for people with disabilities resilience. This study proposed an alternative mechanism which has not been considered yet, that social integration as a travel benefit on health, resilience, and well-being perception. Next please. Yeah. The study adopted a mixed method approach, where both quantitative and qualitative data were collected and analyzed. To answer the question whether travel resulted social integration has a significant effect on people with disabilities, health, and well-being perception, we use the SEM analysis and the mediation effect analysis. And to further explore, to explain, to compare with the quantitative findings, we further adopt the qualitative analysis to answer the question how. Let's go to this. This study chose travelers with mobility issues as our sample, more specifically people with spinal cord injury. Spinal cord injury often leads to partial and complete loss of motor, neural, and sensory functions. Qualitative data were retrieved from the National Spinal Cord Injury Statistical Center of US. A final sample of 2,468 sample over 2019 were returned for the analysis to exclude the impact of COVID-19 on the tourism industry. Next one, please. The quantitative analysis explore the perception of well-being from both satisfaction with life and quality of life. The former dependent on whether basic psychological needs are being met, and while the quality of life is focusing on the resilience of the functional deficits in daily life. Therefore, we built the three models according to the three outcome variables. And we can see from the data that the data fit the model very well. And then we test the mediation effect of social integration. We first test the direct effect from travel participation and these three outcome variables. And it turns out all significant. And we then through the social integration in the model, and we can see that the direct effect will diminishes. However, two of them reduced to be negative. So the type of the mediation effect is inconsistent, while the other one is partial. Thank you. And next one. Then study 2 was conducted to further explore the finding of quantitative analysis. We adopted a quantitative data that belonged to a comprehensive project comprising a series of studies that aim to identify consequences and interventions for travel participation after spinal cord injury. The sample includes 39 interviews conducted between May and August 2020. Next one, please. In the first step, the qualitative analysis including 2 steps. In the first step, the investigator triangulation was performed to enhance the credibility, dependability, and reduce personal bias in analysis and interpretation utilizing the software atlas.ti. And in total, 10 themes, 35 codes were generated from 857 quotations. Next one, please. In the second step, the second order qualitative analysis method was conducted, and we finally have 4 dimensions. The first one is social needs and travel motivation, social integration in travel context, social effects of travel on health, social effects of travel on well-being. Next page, please. This research concludes that travelers with disability who perceive higher social integration from travel participation display more health indicators. Travel environment can also generate medical and health knowledge, hence displaying an overall higher self-evaluation of health. The quantitative analysis under the topic shows that social integration promotes objective health of people with disability, indicators including appetite, sleep quality, less tiredness, less concentration problem, less depression, and self-guilty, and also improved interest and pleasure. The qualitative analysis further complements the finding by reflect on a subjective domain. Travel environment can be unpredictable, occasionally creating physical and psychological issues, which can helpful for people with disability to know their limit, such as when safety, travel distance limitation, and the discomfortable levels of safety in transportations, bowel control abilities, etc., etc. Meanwhile, emergency situation during travel can also produce new knowledge about how to plan and fund medical services. Next one, please. The mediation effect that confirms a partial mediation effect of social integration between travel participation and satisfaction with life, and inconsistent mediation effect of travel participation between travel participation. Social integration between travel participation and the quality of life, meaning that travel resulted social integration being more helpful in satisfying the basic psychological needs of people with disability than solving the daily life issues related to their functional deficits. Statistically, the results also show social integration has a direct impact on the well-being of travelers with disabilities, including promoting confidence, a positive attitude towards life, learning new skills, coping strategies towards obstacles in daily life. And the qualitative analysis further confirms these findings by pointing out that the effect and positive emotions triggered by social integration during travel, including the appreciation of honesty, gratitude, positive attitude towards future travel, persistence, enjoyment, comfortable, etc., etc. Successful social integration during travel can also trigger confidence of people with disability, such as a sense of control, competence, and self-efficacy, etc. Next one, please. The study found that social integration can be more efficient, achieved by 3 types of interactions, including interaction with companies, companies, and professional organizations such as supportive groups and hospitality services. Social needs play a key role in people with disabilities travel motivations. Travel to meet friends, families are among the most important travel purposes. On the other hand, the stress associated with not wanting to bother others or feel embarrassed when meeting new people is a significant motivation. Therefore, the social needs and the self-guilty combined and form a paradox psychology in people with disability, which needs communities and societies to collaborate to build a meaningful travel experiences with well-facilitated, supportive social experiences to overcome such social barriers. Travel activities organized by supportive groups or organizations can be helpful in promoting social integration as well as rehabilitation of people with disability. Not only these groups can provide adaptive resources, medical knowledge, and practical skills, but also travel with other wheelchair users is essential for them to communicate and share experiences. Even though interacting with service providers and helpful strangers are highlight of their travel experience, which may increase their sense of connection with the destination. However, if negative experiences occurs without being properly handled, it may hinder future travel motivation and trigger negative emotions. Next one, please. The study had two limitations. Next one, please. The inaccessible of accessible was brought up many times, often along with a guarantee that the room, the building, the facility is accessible. It is urgent for hospitality and tourism industry to learn that people with disability is not a homogeneous group, but a heterogeneous cohort. And accessible designs in destinations might need to consult opinions from healthcare system and service providers. Accessible barriers can be overcome if hospitality services and healthcare services collaborate with each other to improve the existing accommodated services. And we have three limitations. First, in the study, the inconsistent mediation effect of social tourism, of social integration means that it means that the mediation effect may only be established by certain type of travel participation, certain types of social integration, and certain types of health and well-being indices. Future research on clarifying the relationship is recommended. Secondly, this study specifically focused on people with mobility issues. Further studies on other types of disability is recommended. Finally, this study calls for social tourism study on people with disability, which can help us understand more on tourism experience for people who lack of social integration opportunities. Thank you. Any questions, please? Please.
The speakers, so everybody can hear online. My question is, you talked about how there are, seems like your recommendation is to work with the hospitality and tourism industry to remove barriers to participation in tourism experiences so they get those social connectedness experiences. My question is, are they physical barriers? Are they opportunity barriers? Are they social barriers? And I know you said they're different for all types of disabilities, but like, what is that next step? Where can the industry and researchers and people with disabilities focus their efforts to better promote experiences that give them those social connectedness types of feelings that improve their health and well-being?
Thank you. That's a brilliant question. There are all types of barriers that mentioned during the presentation. For example, the inaccessibility, and that will definitely that helps them to integrate with other people, interaction with other people. And there are also very much more barriers that can not simply be removed by a by a single side of the hospitality industry, of the healthcare system. For example, institutional barrier, structural barrier that needs people from different industries work together to remove that, to remove that. Yes, I think it's a very complex question and need a lot of endeavor. Thank you. Is that answer your question?
Yeah, so what do we do?
That's a good question, and we will look into that in the future. Yeah, that is the question. Anyone?
A very quick question. Otherwise, yes, no? Okay, it was very, very good question.
Sorry, my computer said that Zoom's not detecting the microphone. So for the folks online, apologies because you haven't been hearing me very well. We have one more presentation. It's online by Stefania Escobar from the Free University of Bozen-Bolzano and Linda Osti, also from the Free University of Bozen-Bolzano. The paper is From Smart Cities to Smart City Destinations, an emerging opportunity for sustainable development. Welcome, Stefania.
Thank you very much. I can't express enough how I would love to be there with you, but here we are. So I will do my best to tell online. Okay. Okay. So as you already said, and thank you for presenting, my research is, I will put the timer so that I don't go over the time. So it's looking at tourism data differently, and we have evidence from smart city destinations. So basically, what we would like to investigate. So we're looking at two concept of livability in cities and the concept of integration. And what we actually explored is that the livability of cities depends on the ability to address challenges, several challenges related to human health, to transportation, but also to the quality of life. So in order, as cities are shaped by different socioeconomic forces under different city systems, it is important in order to to achieve a certain level of livability, to have communication and timely resources integrated among the different systems. So what we've seen is that tourism, as one of the city systems, many times is lacking adequate management in city destinations, which actually goes to aggravate already present and pressing city challenges. And we've seen, for example, urbanization, but also overcrowding, and tourism contributes with, for example, over-tourism, but also with conflict that creates, if not well managed, between residents and tourists. So if many cities are looking into smart development approaches to, let's say, overcome these challenges, yet we've seen that tourism initiatives are often separated from what is a smart city project. And we've seen a focus of smart tourism literature on the experience of the tourist as enhanced by a smart experience, rather than on the impact of tourism on the city resources. And on the other hand, we have smart city literature that is often focused on the residents, but disregards the overlapping presence of residents and tourists in many urban spaces, but also in many urban services. So what we want to look at is to see how smart city destinations are integrating tourism and urban development to unveil recovery strategies and emerging opportunities for sustainable development. And what we are looking at is how this can happen through tourism data. So how can tourism data contribute in a smart city destination sustainable development strategy. So what we consider our research design is, first of all, we have semi-structured expert interviews that are integrated to an interaction and questions posed in a seminar back in September 21st, where let's say this study started, and this seminar was having an exchange of information and collaboration between two different cases, which are the cases that we have in our studies. And instead, with regards to secondary data, we have, of course, to strengthen our analysis, different secondary sources. So our study is focused on two city projects. One city is Florence with the project Smart City Control Room, and the other city is Lisbon with the project Lisboa Inteligente. And actually, we look at these projects through a lens, through a sustainability framework, in order to understand what are actually the sustainability outcomes of the integration of tourism data in a smart city strategy. So we looked at first the case of Lisbon and this project Lisboa Inteligente that employ different technologies to gather, store, and analyze data. And actually the tourism data that was retrieved contributed to first the identification of tourism flows based on certain features, but also identify certain areas and the livability in certain areas, the state of certain areas, and also the tourist accommodation in different city areas. So based on tourism data, let's say, added to plan of smart city, different investments have been done in the city with concerns to accessibility and city infrastructures and smart mobility. From our interviewees, we could connect on the idea that tourism data contributed to understand urban and spatial contribution or urban consumption and mobility throughout the city. And therefore to make a more informed policies when it comes to investment allocation. And the second case is the Smart City Control Room in Florence. This project gathers in the same place, in the same physical place, stakeholders that are operating in urban services and mobility of the city of Florence, and they employed roaming data and sensors with the objective, when it comes to specifically related to tourism, to reduce the impact of tourism on city resources and inhabitants. So I think it's something important that I didn't mention before. These are two cities that have a strong tourism presence. So based on the data they gathered with regards to the tourism presence in the city, but also the tourism impact on city resources and infrastructures, they developed a plan which have several initiatives. Among them, they could verify the impact of certain types of mobility related to tourism within the city, and therefore restricted the access of certain kinds of touristic buses to the cities, but also develop a project that allows to connect different attractions outside what is the main historical center, which is, let's say, the most visited and touristic destination when it comes to Florence, in order to allow tourists, but also residents, to visit more than 200 attractions, which allowed also to, let's say, move the flows in a different direction within the city of Florence. But also the idea of developing a parking lot within the highway, so inside the highway, that is connected to the city of Florence through alternative mobility in order for tourists to have a lower impact on the city. So what we found is that what we found is that actually there is a support of different sustainability dimensions when it comes to redirect tourism flows that allows to develop new attractions, which can actually develop new economic ventures, but also help to preserve the heritage and the social cultural authenticity of the city, but also protect destination resources and create long-term economic growth redistribution among stakeholders in cities. So at this point, what we wanted to see is how these projects were actually supporting, which dimensions these projects were supporting. And we could see that many of these projects through our analysis were not supporting concurrently or simultaneously all three dimensions of sustainability, which was one of the things we discussed with our interviewees, that some of them claim the importance of having at least two dimensions supported from the beginning. And since these projects are relatively new, see in the long term how it will progress, but there was no initial stress or fear about the situation. And as I said, we are still collecting data, and this is a point I wanted also to stress, is that although we have tourism data included in a smart city strategy, what we notice is that in some cases, the what I would call the main tourism research centers that could actually store, gather, and analyze this data was not entirely involved, which was something really curious to see, as they are doing other kinds of data analysis, but they were not precisely included in this process. So here we see an example of tourism data included in a city, but tourism stakeholders yet left aside of, to some extent, aside of the strategy. So here we show how what we're studying is how important it is to integrate tourism data through state-of-the-art technologies for developing, enhancing urban sustainability, and how by showing these cases, we show how by developing initiatives and strategies based on this data can actually help to develop more comprehensive policies. And finally, that can help to, by providing this data to policymakers, this can actually help to develop a process that is more integrated, yet we are missing key tourism stakeholders, which could give a valuable contribution when it comes to the data analysis. But we identified limitations, and first of all is that these projects, as I was saying before, when it comes to sustainability dimensions, are at an initial phase, and therefore it will be important to analyze the long-term sustainability impacts. But also this study is based on 2 city cases, so future research would be interesting to expand this research in order to include also cases where of failed tourism big data inclusion, and what are the challenges and the differences among different cities. So I thank you so much for your attention, and I think I have I am on time, so I will stop sharing now.
Thank you, Stephanie. You're more than on time, which leaves us plenty of time for questions.
Great.
Hey, you mentioned in one slide that you're working with the flows, or that stakeholders that you talked about managing flows of visitors in the city. I work with some people from St. Gallen. Stefan Reinhold is at my university right now, and so I'm curious if you can tell us more about the flows and how is that part of your sustainability framework, so to speak, like when you.
Thank you for this question. So when it comes to flows for this project, it was very important to actually have information about the flows around the city in terms of how, which was the spatial mobility of tourism and spatial consumption as well. So in order to understand how different areas of the cities are developed in terms of tourism, and also the impact of tourism on those areas, and also in order to understand how potentially we can shift those flows. This was one important aspect with the interviewees. So to have to kind of try to redirect those flows in less crowded areas, less visited areas, to create not only economic development, but social value in those areas. So this is how sustainability comes in when it comes to spatial movement and flows. I hope I answered to your question.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Oh, is it good? Oh, maybe, can you unmute?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Oh.
I think maybe stand back a little bit from the speakers. Yeah, try that.
I don't think so.
It's coming from your laptop at the front.
My laptop?
The speaker, yeah, on laptop.
Maybe what I should do. Let me turn the sound off.
All right. All right. Oh, all right. Thank you. All right. Sorry for the trouble. So, thank you for the presentation. It was quite interesting. Oh. So, all right. Sorry for the technical problems from this side. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm Sun from Tokyo Tech. I'm very interested in your presentation. One thing I want to ask you is about how you define the smart city and also sustainability in your research, because these two concepts are widely known yet, but how you define affects your research flow as well as the outcome and implication. So I would like to know maybe slight idea about how you define those two terms. And the other is about your data that you mentioned. I couldn't quite capture what kind of specific data you are going to, collect. And I think actually even though you collect the data, there are available data already outside, and maybe even further, there are data by the city level or municipality government level. It's the national tourism statistics. And are you going to consider maybe the scope of the data and the level of the data to maybe integrate those data together? So these are two questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So maybe I can start with the data. As I said, we have semi-structured expert interviews that we are still carrying out. And then we have secondary data that we took from the different projects, but also data at a city level. So understand the different kinds of investments that were made in relation to the strategies. But definitely, it's an interesting point, and I think we can add additional sources with data at a national level, maybe, or not only related to this project itself, but the city level, maybe before and after. Let's see. This is a very interesting point that I will consider. When it comes to smart cities, so I know it's there are a lot of definition, although there is no unified one. So what we considered as smart city in this research is cities that use state-of-the-art technologies to enhance quality of life in the city, to boost sustainable urban development. So what we do not consider is cities that adopt technologies without a specific aim or without a specific objectives, but just because of the technology. So they had to have a specific aim from the beginning in order to, let's say, a specific objective to adopt this technology. And this is why these two cases were interesting, because the adoption of these technologies were made for the specific purpose of understanding, in this case, the tourism impact on the cities. And what was the rest of the question? I think I forgot now. Well, when it comes to sustainability, what we wanted to analyze was actually how these technologies, these strategies had an impact, so that to develop a tourism that was more sustainable, so that could simultaneously enhance the quality of life of the residents, but also enhance the quality of the visit for the tourist. So this dual focus. And one example of that is this initiative that we've seen, Trame d'Arte, where developing additional attractions and connecting them in a network with alternative mobility actually can enhance both quality of life of the residents, but also quality of the experience for the tourist based on our framework. But I can give any additional information on my email. Thank you.
Okay. Any last questions? No?
Okay, Stephanie, thank you. Another very interesting presentation. We have a few minutes left. Maybe I will just come up, because I'm not sure I've been playing with the microphone, so apologies for the sound and the music.
Thank you, Stephanie. Let's see.
Thank you.
An integrative few minutes. Julie argues for an ethic of care and empathy to balance an ethic of justice for sustainable tourism. That's our theme for session 4. Huang brings attention to authenticity, slowness, experience, environmental consciousness, and quality of life. And one might ask, well, environmental consciousness alongside social and cultural consciousness as well, because there is that tourist in relationship to the community, the hosts, the people providing the services. Chenggang really talks about and really makes us attentive to isolation and loneliness and the importance of inclusiveness as an important principle. And one can think about the implications for mobilities when we think about slow tourism, and also when we think about inclusiveness for people with disabilities. And Evan's question was very prescient. How do we take such important research as you all are doing and actually make sure that it is being transferred, it's being diffused into practice? And how do industry and marketers address, for instance, not just slow tourism, but people with disabilities with empathy and care, right? That gap has to be thought about. And Stefania Escobar's very important work, From Smart Cities to Smart Destinations, also has a kind of an integrative theme here, integrating stakeholders and services to improve economic opportunities, environmental sustainability, and as she says, the flows are inclusive of social value as well. So we see a consistent theme through these papers, at first, which I thought were very disparate, but there are integrations for sustainability. Diane Dredge, over the next couple of months in the Journal of Tourism Futures, has an academic invited paper on regenerative tourism, transforming mindsets, systems, and practices, which may be worth looking at to say, how do we bring all the diverse stakeholders, including industry, to speak with your academic research? When we think of a last closing few minutes of session 4, does anybody have any burning questions, any integrated questions, any questions we didn't address, and maybe any comments from all the presenters if they feel that they have something else to add too? How do we bring all this together? In the last few minutes, we see some themes that are integrating environmental consciousness, inclusiveness, right? Understanding the perspective of the others, and thinking not just of environmental, but also the social, the cultural, and the political aspects. We haven't spoken too much yet about politics, but there are implications for policy as well. Any last thoughts? Anyone online? No? Yes? A meditative moment for sustainability and tourism. We have much to do in an era of the Anthropocene, and I'm very, very pleased to have had the opportunity to moderate. Please stay around if you have any questions for our presenters, who have done a very, very good job of staying on time. Thank you. It made my life way easy. All I got to do is figure out my Zoom sounds now. Okay, are we good? In that case, all those online as well, thank you so much. Come join us for a virtual lunch and we can continue these conversations.